It's hard to believe that it's been almost 2 months since we've been in this virtual space. Our first webinar was held on April 6th. And we're now at what, May 21st. And since then, since we've started hosting the webinars, just thought I'd give you some numbers. We've had an average of 88 people attend live, and we're working on numbers that attend afterwards because they get populated on Pulse afterwards. So know that you guys are having an impact and that we're sharing broadly and sharing experiences, which is pretty exciting. I will start by reminding everyone that all of our previous webinars are updated and uploaded on Pulse. Jen reminded me today that some people have had issues. If you click on the link on Pulse and it doesn't open for whatever reason, that might be because it's trying to open the YouTube video in Explorer. And I'm becoming more technologically advanced with this, and I've learned that apparently things do not work well on Explorer. So if you click it on Pulse and you can't open it, cut and paste the link into any other browser, and apparently it opens. So that's my tech support for the day. So today we have another highly anticipated webinar, and this one is on virtual groups. And we know that groups are truly an integral part of our care delivery. And this transition to virtual care happened pretty quickly. So we know that some groups were actually interrupted sort of mid-group. And I know that some other groups may have started over the summer, being started soon. So there's lots of enthusiasm and lots of anticipation to hear about some of the work that's been happening. You're going to hear today about some of the foundational work that the virtual groups group did in learning kind of about how we can best adapt what we were doing in person in groups to the virtual environment. And particularly exciting, we have the opportunity to share kind of early experiences from across the program of those who have been working through virtual groups. So again, we're really fortunate to have representation from multiple areas of the program. So presenting today, we've got Alexa Bagnall, who is the lead of the virtual groups group. We've got representing community mental health and addictions, Anne-Marie Joyce, who's with us. Representing AIS, we've got Sateria Sergatis, Natasha Wright-DeVoe, and Diana Stewart, who are all waving as I say their names, which I appreciate that. And from CIS, we've got Colleen Flynn and Carrie Fraser. So as always, know that attendees are muted, so we can't hear you or see you, but presenters, we can see you, and some of you will be muted during the talk, but you'll unmute yourself to speak. We ask that people feel free to type in questions, reflections, comments as we go through. You can type that into either the Q&A or the comments box. If you need to know where to find that, if you click on your screen near the bottom, you'll see a whole bunch of bubbles. There's a bubble that looks like a question mark or a comment coming out of your mouth. You can click that and type into questions and chat there. As previously, I'll be moderating those questions at the end, so we'll save them to the end and then we'll pose them to the panel. And then again, as a reminder to everyone that the webinar is being recorded, so the questions that you ask will be recorded as we go forward. So without further ado, I will turn over the presentation to Alexa, who will get us started.
Thank you, Jill. So welcome to our virtual group for group guideline and early experiences. And I'm going to first thank all of the people who have volunteered to present with me today on their early experiences and their work as part of the virtual group for group. So thank you to all of you. And I'm going to go to the next slide. This is the virtual group for group that we all worked together. It was a wonderful collaboration across the program. It was fantastic to learn about other services and also to benefit from the creativity of all of you. And because all of the individuals who worked in the group were integrated in other services, we got to hear from all of you as they brought it back to us, and all the different iterations that we went through. So many of you will now have seen the documents from this virtual working group, which include the virtual care, mental health and addictions virtual care guideline with special considerations around group, and the new group progress note, which you'll hear a little bit more about in this, as well as virtual group expectations and confidentiality. And a special treat today that you will also hear about engagement strategies developed by AAS, and there are also some from CIS you will hear about, and that will also be attached to this webinar as that information has been put together. It's also great just individually when you're working with youth. It can be very helpful, but it will be really important when we're doing groups and engaging our youth. So thank you to all of you who have been a part of this very hardworking group. Next slide. What we're hoping to cover today in record time. First, to go over some of the guidelines and key points that are different about virtual groups. Not everything that's there, but what's different about virtual groups from regular groups and also from individual work virtually. And there was also a request to hear what's going on across the country, so I'll do a little update about that in terms of groups across the country. We're also going to do a CMHA group update. That's with Anne-Marie, a little bit about Chilled and Cool Kids and where those groups are in terms of their development in a virtual format. And very much anticipated IT update. I'm going to call it IT for Dummies, which is IT for me. And Anne-Marie is going to do that for us. CIS virtual groups, we're going to hear from Colleen and Carrie Fraser. And these we'll also hear from CIS around their early experiences, both with parent and child group, some of the challenges, some of the rewards, and a little bit about documentation. And then lastly, we're going to finish with 3 AIS clinicians who are going to tell us about the learnings from AIS, both engagement strategies, how they're engaging around expectations and confidentiality, and an update on Connect. Next slide. So what's different about virtual groups? Next slide. So we're going to go into I'm going to do broad strokes of what's different, and then you're going to hear more about it as we go through each of the presenters. So first of all, confidentiality and privacy. I think we are all very skilled now virtually of doing that. There are some slight differences with group. One of the things is think of what you're bringing into your home, and we talk about that. Now you're bringing all of these families or other youth into your home as well. So you now become responsible for privacy and confidentiality of others' information. When we do regular groups, we talk about that a lot. You don't talk about things outside a group. We have lots of, we don't have contact outside of groups. We have lots of good guidelines around that. But when it's in the home and there are other people in the home and may hear information about others, making people aware of that and doing that in a very thoughtful way so that people can think about others' information as well as their own in terms of protection. And so that's one of the main differences in confidentiality and privacy, and you're going to hear how some of the ways we've been trying to address that. Engagement. So many of us have been working to engage youth. Some youth are very anxious about being seen on camera, and then think about being seen on camera, and then everyone else can see you on camera. It's just not the clinician. So how do you get kids comfortable? How do you get them engaged? And one of the things we realize, and all of us who are doing virtual care, is it takes a lot of energy on the part of the clinician. So how do you get prepared for that? How do you have that energy? And how do you keep them engaged? And that also includes time frames. So we know that some groups may have been going more than an hour, 2 hours when they're in person because you have a lot more movement and breaks. But it's unlikely that you're going to be able to sustain attention for more than an hour, and in some cases less than an hour, depending on the age group you're working with. So it's really important to consider those parameters in the groups you're running. Preparation is a big thing. It takes a lot to coordinate a group in general, but when you're doing it in a virtual format, you really have to be organized. You have to have a clear agenda and know what you and your group leaders are doing together and at what point and what your roles are. And the group coordination piece you'll see it in the guidelines, but there are roles that group leaders will have during the group. And when we're having youth groups, we talk about having different roles. So a person who would moderate the group, so be able to sort of monitor the group chat. One of the things with privacy and confidentiality is there is a private chat function that would be turned off. We also want people to only be using first names so that their privacy is also protected. And we want to have someone who can actually monitor the group as well. So if there are safety concerns, how can they leave the group to make sure they can check in? And that pre-session work, which is part of the group coordination, and you're going to hear how people have done that in AIS and CIS of connecting early one-on-one with participants to go over confidentiality and privacy and safety, and then what will be happening if there is a safety concern during the group, and how one group leader would be able to leave the group, the virtual group, to check in with that person, would have that contact information. And that includes the last part, which is the safety and check-ins. That's kind of a very fast overview of some of the guidelines, but The guidelines are great for anyone who is engaging in groups in terms of looking over and making sure those are the things that you've covered before you enter into starting a group. Next slide. I stole this slide, I will admit, from Dipna Martin. Thank you, Dipna, from AIS. She put this together. They've launched some groups, and this was a slide format of the expectations document created by the Virtual Group Working Group. I'm not going to go over it in detail, but what it does is gives the chance at the very beginning of group to go over what you've already gone over a couple of times. But as we all know, sending information to families and teens by email is not always read. And so it's really important that they're aware of the guidelines. And so this was a great way to kind of make sure everyone is aware when they start and everyone knows the ground rules, so to speak, in starting group around how to use Zoom, making the most of the group, and privacy and confidentiality. And one of the things that's clearly emphasized is everyone's learning here. So being very forgiving of each other and very kind to our group leaders too, as we progress with this new technology. And next slide. In terms of cross-country, there are virtual groups now being implemented across the country in Child and Adolescent Mental Health and Addictions Program. They are being implemented in different ways. So some places just started groups that had already been ongoing, so already had connections with the participants. So that was a little bit easier because there at least was some groundwork already in relationships. There have been some who started de novo groups where people are meeting each other for the first time. And that does require more engagement energy to get people to know each other. There's a longer warm-up period. And then size of groups. And we noted that in our guidelines as well. Size of groups does make a difference. Larger groups are much harder to manage, and there are considerations around the size of group, especially with youth, in terms of being able to engage them well. And cross-country, there are some intensive services that have launched groups. It's more in outpatient setting, but there are some intensive services, much as we've done at the IWK, that have begun to use their groups virtually and are coming into some great learnings that we'll be sharing as well. So we are, I would say, a little ahead and right in line with sort of the early adopters of virtual care groups. Now I am going to turn it over to Anne-Marie.
You can go right on to the next slide, please. So in community mental health and addictions, we are going through all the different groups that we run, a big long list. And different clinicians have taken responsibility for different groups and coming up with of how we can change groups from in-person to virtual.
Anne-Marie, I'm just going to pause you for 1 sec. Wonder if you can just speak up a little bit or get a little bit closer to your mic. It's kind of hard to hear you.
No problem. So those are the groups that we are proposing to run. The leadership is going to take a look at that list and decide which ones we should run based on feasibility and which are the most important and wait less and a whole bunch of other things. Next slide, please. There's a plan in place as well for all of the groups that were cut off. Most of the groups that were cut off had only a couple of sessions left, but there's different plans depending on the group. We're probably going to be running the new groups over the summertime, and there's lots of variability in the specifics. So for example, in the zones groups, they're proposing keeping the kids and parents together, whereas in the chilled groups, we're proposing having breakout rooms to separate out the parents. I also forgot to mention that the autism specific care is also looking at running a couple of groups. They're looking at fears and at facing your fears. Next slide, please. We were fortunate to get a really quick reply from the cool kids and chilled people to say, absolutely, of course you can run groups virtually, and here are a list of considerations. And it was really cool because the considerations, 90% of them, our virtual groups had already come up with. They said that we can mail our manuals to patients, but it is important that you cannot upload or download the manuals in electronic form. The only exception to that is we're allowed to show single pages. For example, this is page 13. Open your manual to page 13, and this is. Next slide, please. So I don't pretend to be an expert on technical stuff, but I may be a little more familiar than the average clinician, so I'll do my best. I know there have been a lot of concerns about privacy and that this has been a very steep learning curve. So I really encourage everybody, take the time you need before you're actually doing it to practice. Find a colleague to practice with your fellow group leaders. Next slide, please. So I gave this a bit of thought, and I thought it might be helpful to divide the different kinds of technology into high to no risk. The highest risk really comes from using a device where you can be overheard or where people can see what's on your screen. So in public or with other people in the same room, that's the highest risk. And it seems like a kind of a no-brainer. The lowest risk, on the other hand, would be not using technology at all. There's no chance of someone breaking confidentiality if they're just, for example, reading a book. In between is where it gets a little bit grayer. So listening on speaker is much worse than listening on headphones for the obvious reason that you're more likely to be overheard. However, it doesn't actually make a difference whether it's headphones or earbuds. And a lot of people have been asking about Bluetooth, and I have a little slide about Bluetooth next, but it's actually lower risk than helper devices. So those would be the little smart speakers that people have, like Google or Siri or Alexa. Dr. Bagnall, she's lovely, the other Alexa. Because in order for those to work, they are always listening, always. That's how they know when you say, hey, Google, which means what they're doing is they're constantly recording everything that goes on around them, sending it to centralized computers, which are analyzing them for voice patterns. So granted, there's millions of conversations going on all the time. So your piece of data is really, really small and they're not really interested in it. Nevertheless, for things like therapy where confidentiality is so important, I really recommend just unplugging the things. Don't have them plugged in at all, so there's no chance. And turn off things like Siri, just so those things aren't listening, just to be extra careful. Next slide, please. Why do I say Bluetooth is low risk? I know that when we get messages from IT about Bluetooth, some of our IWK devices aren't allowed to use Bluetooth and things like that. The reason for that is because if we're carrying them out into public, there are some data transmission things with really skilled hackers that could possibly maybe happen. And IT is really, really, really careful when it comes to healthcare data. But for the kinds of devices our patients are going to be using, the transmission is about 10 meters. That's 10 meters if there's nothing in between. It's just air. So as soon as there's a person, a wall, transmission goes down pretty small. They're deliberately designed that way so that you can't connect to them too far away because they only want to connect to something close by. And in terms of the actual the audio, what's coming out, only one device can listen at a time. So if your headphones are connected to Bluetooth, your speaker can't be connected to Bluetooth. And frankly, Nova Scotia isn't exactly a hotbed of Russian hackers, so we probably don't have to worry about anybody having the technical skill that would be required to listen in on Bluetooth. It's just really, really low risk. Next slide. So here's some tips and hints for using all of this stuff, and this would apply not only to groups, but individual sessions as well. One of the most important things is where is your Wi-Fi? You want to be as close as possible to Wi-Fi because it works a lot like Bluetooth. Anything that's in between you and the Wi-Fi, including doors, floors, walls, will make it harder for the signal to get through. And distance really matters a lot. So ideally, we want to encourage our patients and ourselves to be as close as possible to your router. If you don't know what your router is, definitely check with someone so that you can find out what that device is, what it looks like, so that you know that you're actually close. The only way to get a really pure connection is actually to use one of those funky blue wires to connect things. But Wi-Fi is actually pretty good nowadays. If two people want to use headphones with the same device, you can't use Bluetooth. That won't work. You're going to have to do it the old school way with this kind of thing that has a cord. And there's something called a splitter, which is just like a Y-shaped cord. You plug it in and then two different headphones can plug into it. That's the best way if two people are using headsets. Screen size is important. That means if someone is using a beautiful big desktop, they're going to see everything during group. And if someone is using a little phone, they're only going to see one piece at a time. So for example, right now I'm talking on my computer, so I can see all of my colleagues' faces. I can see the PowerPoint. And if I wanted to, I could have my email on the side too. I don't. But if you have a phone, you'd only get one of those things. So if you wanted, for example, go from whatever's being presented to some of the people, you're going to have to swipe through. Don't worry, swiping right and left doesn't mean anything when you're doing a group. The same. Other thing I've encountered a lot when I'm doing sessions with people with sorry, this is a stereotype, but it's true, with a lot of teenage boys in the house, that it gets really laggy or slow. And you'll notice this when people are kind of moving in an unnatural way or you're missing part of what they're saying. Chances are somewhere in the house, someone's using a lot of internet. And the more internet users there are using the same Wi-Fi, the worse the signal is. So another tip is to ask during sessions that they're not playing Fortnite and other things elsewhere in the house, because you want to save all of the bandwidth for the group. And also remind everybody, do not use data for any of these video chat things. It needs to be Wi-Fi. If you're using data, it's going to be hideously expensive. And do know that we have some technology available. I think we talked about that at the last one, that there are devices available and there's help available for families that don't have the things that they need to teach the group. I think that's the end, but let's go to the next slide. Yes, it is. Thanks very much. And I'm going to pass it over to my colleagues from CIS.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. So CIS virtual group experience, we can go to the next slide. Carrie, I'm starting with the pre-group and pre-assessment and preparation. So our experience was that we had a lag in our treatment from going from face-to-face treatment to virtual treatment. So we had opportunity and time to connect with, I am the facilitator, host now, clinician in the parent group. So I was able to, for a few reasons, we did a pre-group, pre-assessment, pre-connection, and we were able to set that up with the clinician who was already involved with the child and family. And I was, my made-up words, zooming in, and I did a piece of work with the family about not only our parent group, but our children's group as well. So the readiness piece with the caregivers, so parent group, caregiver group, we had the potential for 12 caregivers to come to the parent group. So we had individual and some dyad Zoom sessions. And really what was talked about was, again, what Alexa had touch base on, confidentiality, also troubleshooting barriers, very different to be on a group on your phone versus on a laptop or on a tablet. We also talked about any issues in terms of our children are 12 and under. So how will the parents support the child? How will the child be supported in our children's group, which Carrie will speak more about. She was the clinician with the parent group, or sorry, with the children's group. And also just the general expectations, how it would look coming into group, what to expect from parent and child group, and then safety planning and considerations. During those pre-group reconnection sessions, we did also, I was able to provide my telephone number, my IWK cell number, and we, of course, like all of us, double-checked address, double-checked their telephone number, and spoke about, the plans around that. If a child dysregulated during group or came off the group, off the Zoom, and also if there was something happening with the parents. We had three, very fortunate, we had three clinicians. Two are, of course, defined as co-hosts, and I was the host. And we were able to also give families that information about who they would see on the screen, not only what it would be like for them to be on the screen. Carrie, do you want to speak to the children's group?
Sure. So for, as Colleen was saying, we had the talk to the parents about getting the child ready for group and what would it look like for them to, when the child's participating, what does it look like for them to participate, but also too as well, we had three co-hosts. One, we assigned them various roles. That was quite important in terms of preparation, so we can kind of help manage that during the group, and also just a lot of reminders around group when it's going to happen, and just so they know not just the initial appointment, but another appointment reminder too as well, so they can kind of participate. And a lot of discussion around safety and what would happen. And so one of us took that role, as would have all the family's numbers. If something happened during the group, then we would be the, checking in and that type of thing.
Move on to the waiting room. Do you want to talk about your waiting room care?
Yeah. So, so in terms of the waiting room, we've had a bit of discussion about how can we use that in the group setting. So I just I individualized it a little bit, added a picture and some sayings and different things, and you can change it up. So that's what my waiting room looks like in terms of that graphic there. And just kind of thinking of when do we admit the children, when do we admit the parents into the group, and those types of things. So usually we come on about a half hour before to prepare, and then at the time of the group, then we give them a few minutes to come in, and then try to admit everybody at the same time. And I know Colleen's experience is similar, but I know she had some other things too as well. I'll let you add that.
So I will confess to my colleagues that I would say I over-prepared for this idea of restarting parent group. I said to lovely Alexa Bagnall, I'm not sure why I didn't trust the process more. I really, got into a bit of an anxious spin around what if. So, I think overthinking, you only have so many hours in the day to do that. The waiting room, the parents and the caregivers and the children, I'm lucky enough, know me. So the waiting room, I was going to say, you know me, 5 minutes behind, come on in. But I decided not to, just for my own angst and wanting it to be absolutely perfect. So I did, my waiting room just sort of spoke to, or the waiting room, it's not mine, the waiting room for parent group and caregiver group just spoke to, we'll be with you in a moment. Yes, you have arrived, something small and somewhat humorous. And we'll talk about it in just a minute, but we did a mock group. And what I was noticing in mock group that I took away was people coming in one as they entered or as they were ringing the doorbell. We actually ended up having our parent group, caregiver group wait in the waiting room, and we admitted most. We didn't lock it after. We just monitored who may be coming late. We're also very fortunate because parents, caregivers do text our TSW. So we had that added layer of if something was going sideways, we were getting that information from the TSWs who also were attending parent group, caregiver groups. So Carrie, anything else about waiting rooms?
No, I think that's everything for that part. We can move on to mock group. In terms of mock group, Colleen, lovely, defined and came up with the term mock group, and it was something that was really helpful. So basically, for the child group, we did that one first, and so we had prepared for the group, the 3 leaders, and including myself, and had all these great ideas and everything. So we were all ready to go to have our mock group, and thought we were all pretty confident about that. And then it happened. So we realized that no matter what you think you know about the process and what you're doing, you need to run through it to kind of get the flow and everything. You just things like technology and assigning roles to people, and who's doing the just smooth, and who's going to do this part or that part. So I was lucky. I had Colleen was a participant in mock group, but I also had some other staff members that joined who were not involved in the planning at all. So that was helpful too. So some so that was really good. So lots of great feedback, and we were able to take that and use that. So it was very valuable to do that. I definitely would recommend it. It was an opportunity to test all your equipment and make sure your slides are working. We used videos with the kids too as well. So we wanted to make sure that was smooth in the transition, because our kiddos are quite a lot younger. So the transitions need to be fairly quick, because yeah, they're ready to move on, if not. So yeah, so those are the type of things that that we kind of looked at and thought about. So definitely, and one thing I did learn too, I think that does take time to have a bit of a rhythm and a routine. So, be kind to yourself too in that sense, right? Because
Yeah.
we're all learning. Yeah. So I'll get Colleen to speak to her experience as a participant and as a leader, because she did one for the parent group as well.
So, mock group was born out of my 20-year-old when I was anxiously ruminating about the planning of parents coming back. She just said she's a science student, and she was like, "Just mock it, just mock it, mom." And so that's how that was born. So as a participant, it was lovely. I was able all the way back to what the actual email looked like, the Zoom email, what was attached to it, what information caregivers and families were receiving for their children, for themselves. So I really appreciated that. I wanted to see it from the lens of our clients, our families, and I did. I was able to come in. Carrie and her colleagues did a fantastic job. We did have some members of our team come in as children, so that was a busy place, and sort of how our younger children sort of taking on that persona. So that was interesting to watch, and how that was facilitated. And then I actually did a mock group as well to see about technology. That was really helpful. Role, telephone numbers, concerns, just seeing how it was. And we were really fortunate again, because our staff, outside of their extremely busy days, did this with us. I think we sort of voluntold them, hey, Carrie, but
Yeah.
so Carrie's statement is, just when you think you are prepared to do your group, do a mock group. So it was a really valuable learning piece. I know people in different areas of healthcare and our hospital may not have the opportunity to do that for time. And if you do, it is really helpful, even if you just have a few folks coming in as the clients. So.
Right. Next slide.
Yes.
Okay, just a little bit. So as Colleen was mentioning, we were in the middle of our group, our cohort. It took a few weeks for us to get up in technology and then get the groups ready to go. So we had to reconnect with our clients, our kiddos, and so that was a lot of preparation went into that. So how do you do that with you haven't seen them in a while, you've been talking to their families and different things, but you haven't really had that chance to see them face to face in the group setting. So we knew that we'd have to have a lot of very strong visuals. We brought in a lot of the same structure and things that we would have done in group on the unit. So I had that slide there. Kind of like we always have a list of what's going on in group, and we have brought pictures of the unit into our slideshow that we used. We used videos from that were very interactive, so the kids had to get up and do things and the type of games and that type of thing. So we found that they were very engaged. The kids that were there, we gave them a little bit of time at the end to chat so they can reconnect a little bit, the Minecraft talk, which was fine. So, yeah, so in terms of the other things too as well, we did one, it was we used Go Noodle, and which is something that we do use a lot in the classroom in different places. It's an interactive a program, and a lot of great different resources on it for breathing, and has some interactive games that are short so that kids could see the visual, but they'd also get up and they would do the activity. So yeah, so I think those are that worked out well. So just giving them a chance to kind of connect that way, and a lot of like high strong visuals and good structure, and we have expectations that we outline at first, and similar done in more of a child-friendly way. So that's probably um, that's all I really have in terms of that. And we're still like working, going, doing it, building it as we go. So yeah, stay tuned.
So parent caregiver group, we did not have slides. We did not use the technology for folks to connect with us with thumbs up, virtual thumbs up. We actually asked people to use their hands because we did have someone on a phone and it was quite cumbersome from mock group. So our group, we had excellent attendance. Because people have to change their schedule. Some of our parents and caregivers are working, so we offered it at the same time. We tried to match it with what was actually happening when they were face to face with us. I have to say, in retro, it was one of the more powerful groups I felt I had been a part of. Felt quite honored. Folks came in and we did. We were thoughtful about it. We did a piece around check-in, but we, immediately caregivers go to checking in about the family, the child, and then we shifted it sort of gently to their check-in for their own sake, for their own mental health, for their own sense of regulation. And we had a strong share. We only had it booked. Well, I had it booked for like the whole day in my mind, but I only had it really booked with the parents for 1 hour and 15 minutes, looking to go for an hour. So we need it longer. So this week it'll be a bit longer. And we didn't poll, we didn't do anything. We did just have some parents speak to sort of the power of the group and seeing each other and connecting. And the backstory is that the clinicians have worked extremely hard, whether on the telephone or shifting to Zoom, staying in contact. We've stayed in contact with our families. So part of what I knew was that families were caregivers and parents were really interested in coming back to groups. So I had a bit of that in the background. Yeah, so stay tuned. We have another one this week as well. So in terms of documentation, what I can say is that thank you, Jill Chorney, for all your help around documentation. This documentation, virtual documentation, has replaced some of the other documents that we used face-to-face to capture group. And I did use it with the pre-group screen, and also have it for the regular group. And it's been friendly and workable. And I'm not always positive about record keeping and documents, so I feel like I'm a really good person to maybe say something sunny about the documents. So, Carrie?
I agree. We've used it a few times. We've had a couple groups now and used it, and it has been, quite user friendly and easy to use. And yes, thank you. So it really fits with the kind of work that we're doing. So
I think that's our piece.
that's it. Yeah.
We're moving on to Diana Stewart, Natasha Wright DeVoe, and Soteria. And Soteria, I'm not going to try your last name. It'd be unjust. It would be an injustice.
All right, thank you. So my name is Soteria, and I'm the recreation therapist with the Yellow Carrier team. And as Alexa said, we'll also have Natasha Wright DeVoe, our OT, also from Yellow, and Dinah Stewart, recreation therapist from Blue, who will be sharing their experiences too with virtual groups so far. So I have to say, when our team started talking about facilitating groups again, we were pretty excited. And of course, we were a bit anxious. We're not going to lie about that. And we had lots of questions, given that we would be rolling groups out virtually for the first time. One of our main questions was, how on earth are we going to elicit and maintain youth engagement in groups virtually? We know it can be challenging as it is to engage youth in groups in typical circumstances, yet alone to engage the youth to be in a virtual group, in physical isolation from their peers, and to be in front of a screen with people they may or may not have an attachment with. So we were brainstorming as a team, and one of the ideas we had was to first support the youth in developing their own individual Cope Ahead plan and routine for groups. So Cope Ahead plans, they're not new. For those of you who are familiar with DBT, we use them in emotion regulation. We use them in our emotion regulation group when youth are anticipating a stressful event. Others may refer to them as a type of safety plan, and at the same time, they are still quite different. The Cope Ahead plans that our youth developed are basically sets of emotion regulation strategies and routines that they can use at 3 different points in time. So the first point in time being prior to group, to be able to settle into group. The second point in time is actually during group, to be able to stay in group and maintain their engagement if they were to become overwhelmed or dysregulated. And then lastly, it's to be used if they were to actually leave group, if they needed to, because they were overwhelmed or dysregulated, that they could implement these strategies. And then the hope is that they would return to group more promptly than not having those skills or implementing those skills. So just to share a little bit about our process, we really knew that the youth were going to be in different places in terms of their readiness for an experience in groups. So like, for example, we had some youth who had participated in our groups pre-pandemic and had established relationships with us and their peers. Then we also had youth that had not laid eyes on their peers before, and perhaps were not even familiar with all of the facilitators. And then we also had the youth that I think Lexa may have mentioned before, who may have been brand new to groups and were flat out uncomfortable going virtual and being seen on a screen. So given all this, we knew anxiety would be overall pretty high. So as a team, we really wanted to set a tone with the youth that they had a sense of efficacy and control prior to and during group. So what we did is we met individually with each of the youth to identify and create their own Cope Ahead plans and routines for groups. So some of the questions we asked that guided the youth to develop their plans, they were pretty basic questions. There isn't really like an actual tool that we used. It's really just a set of cues that we would use to kind of guide the discussion with the youth. But I can give you some examples. So some examples of questions we'd ask the youth to identify strategies and routines for settling into group. We would ask, in your past experience with groups, what routines or strategies did you find helpful to go and be settled in group? So if the youth feels that they have a lot of energy and they anticipate they will have a hard time sitting still in group for a period of time, maybe their routine is going outside and taking a quick walk before going to group, or maybe it's doing some wall push-ups, maybe it's belting out a tune. Routines or strategies for other youth might be sitting on their front step for some fresh air. Maybe it's listening to a certain playlist. Maybe it's playing with Fluffy, their pet cat. Maybe it's finding a weighted blanket if they have one in their house, or going through a routine of making a hot chocolate or getting a glass of ice water. So some of the logistical things that we also had to consider were maybe with some of our youth who presented with some severe ADHD was, how are you going to remember you have group, right? So are you going to use that calendar that we sent you in the mail and post it on your fridge? Are you going to keep it on your nightstand? Or do you need mom maybe to help remind you that you actually have group? So for the second part of the plan, we also wanted to gauge what strategies and routines the youth needed to be present during group. So we asked questions like, what do you need to have with you to be settled in group and to be able to focus? And the second part to that piece was asking, what are some tools or strategies you can use in case you notice you're becoming overwhelmed or distressed? Here, the youth could identify, depending on what goals they were working on with their individual clinician, maybe it's sitting in and naming their feelings. If they were working on some DBT goals, maybe it's writing the emotion wave out, having various fidgets, paper and pencil for doodling, having a glass of water or something self-soothing like a hot chocolate, using the weighted blanket we talked about before, engaging in box breathing, etc. Right? All of these could be possible strategies they could use if they notice they're becoming a little bit overwhelmed in group. Now, here's the thing, if they become dysregulated during group and their strategies aren't working in the moment to re-regulate, then the way we had it planned is that they can communicate with the moderator, who will then review skills used and cue new ones and help co-regulate if needed. So our moderator is, I think someone talked about it before, is our third identified team member who'd be assigned to group and could serve as, one of their roles would be to serve as in the moment coaching for youth who do become dysregulated or become overwhelmed with content or during the group. So the moderator will also debrief with the youth after group if needed, and then together they can really look to see what, evaluate their plan and see how their plan is working, and if it needs to be changed, if things need to be added. So I guess to keep track of all this, we created this cheat sheet, and it's nothing really fancy. It's just a table, and we have it on hand with us to give each of the youth. We have it on hand. The moderator has it on hand as well as the youth, and it's meant to be used as a quick reference guide to their strategies. So our cheat sheet right now includes their name, their K number, their address, the telephone number they can be contacted in case we get disconnected, the team members assigned to the team, and of course their plan. So we thought we might give you an example just to kind of help illustrate a little bit about how we use the plan. So let's say we have our teen Sam, and let's say Sam is highly anxious and she has difficulty staying present in group. Before group, part of Sam's routine might be to sit and play with her dog because she finds it regulating. It's also to make a chamomile tea, have a snack, get some fresh air. During group, she finds fidgets really helpful, and she has a fidget ring that she plans on using. And she also has some drawing material because she likes to doodle. If she becomes dysregulated, she finds it helpful to name her feelings, to go outside for a minute and practice mindfulness through a paced breathing exercise that she uses. If those still aren't helpful, what she plans on doing is using her other tip skills like progressive muscle relaxation, splashing ice water on her face or cold water. And if all those strategies don't work for her, then what her plan is to seek out the moderator for co-regulation. And she finds validation helpful, being listened to, being provided some reassurance by staff. So that's sort of an example. I think the main thing is with the plans is that we hope that the youth become less reliant on them, and that they can increase their tolerance for groups as they practice and use their skills, so that they become pretty much more ingrained day to day. So yeah, that's pretty much my piece with that. I don't know who wants to go next.
Okay, I'll try again.
Thanks.
So I just want to review a little bit what the blue team had done at the beginning. So we had done some meetings prior to go through the expectation form. And then at the start of the group, what we did was we just did a verbal thumbs up if you're at the location that you said that you're at when you met with your clinicians, and the same phone number. If that's not the case, then the moderator would take that person and get that information updated. And we would do just, again, another reminder overview of the confidentiality and no screenshots. The other thing to note is the names that are on the Zoom calls, we want to make sure that they were first names. So if you are the host, you have the capability just to kind of remove a last name, or if they put a silly name up, just to kind of correct that as well. Another thing just to check on is the environment that they're in, and they're using headphones if they have them. One thing that we talked about in this group is the idea of these icebreakers. So I know that I come from a practice that does a lot of hands-on icebreakers just to kind of come together and set a tone for the group, which provided a little bit of challenges. So myself and a number of the colleagues that I work with brought together some ideas, and we created a sheet of ideas of how icebreakers can become virtual. And I think that that form is going to be attached to this presentation that people can check out afterwards. And what we decided to do for our first group was just to make it an orientation group that would allow some of our youth who had known each other prior to the COVID isolation to have an opportunity to reconnect. So we offered an orientation group that we started off putting together a poll. We used the poll feature, which was a fun feature to utilize for the first day because it set a nice tone and it connected people through the shared experience of our isolation. So a poll feature, if you haven't used it on Zoom yet, you can go in ahead of time prior to the group to set your questions. We use questions like, what are you spending most of the time doing right now? And we had YouTube, Netflix, Harry Potter series, baking bread, and all of those things that people are doing. What's the first thing that you're going to do when isolation is over? Visit friends and family, get a haircut, go to the dentist. Again, all of the things that we're all kind of recognizing that we're missing. And then another question of what's today's date? In an attempt to stump them a little bit, that we're all kind of getting disoriented. So we had a good laugh, and that brought kind of the right energy we wanted to enter into that group and make it friendly and calm and ease any anxieties that they might have, and just trying to keep it real that they know us, because we were coming with a group that we had worked with prior to, so we had that attachment. Then we spent the rest of the group just doing an apple and onion experience for what their isolation has been like, recognizing that, it's important to recognize the highlights and the things that are going well, but then at the same time, to make space for the challenges and the things that are existing that are proving to be pretty difficult on a day-to-day basis. And again, that was a really nice way to come together in the shared experience that we're all going through and give staff an opportunity to do a little bit of assessment on how they're doing. First of all, how they're doing in joining and speaking on camera, but also how they're doing in their isolation experience. Are they being reflective on how this has been going for them? So I think I'm gonna end it there, because I know that the time, I know Natasha's got a piece, so I'll pass it over to her.
Thanks, Diana. Everyone can hear me okay? Thumbs up. Okay, I'll be really quick. So similar to Blue, you had that orientation group, and Alexa, you had just mentioned earlier in your part around the expectations that DIPNA had sent you. So in our first group, DIPNA took us through those expectations, and then in order to bring those to life, and I'll ask Jen to go to the next slide, please. To bring those kind of expectations to life, we looked at developing shared guidelines. So these are kind of the focus questions we honed in on to kind of elicit what the kids were thinking. So what do you need to feel safe in group? What do you need to feel supported in group? And then what do you need to help us keep you on track in group? So from those questions, and if we can jump to the next slide, which is our last slide, I believe, before questions. So these are some of the things that the kids came up with. So things like maintaining confidentiality, we had discussions about that. I won't go through all these, but being respectful, listening, validating everybody's kind of vulnerabilities in group and including our own and modeling that as facilitators. Again, a lot of people have spoke to the anxiety provoking with anticipating groups and then starting them up. So kind of modeling that for the kids and coping ahead ourselves. And then the discussion about what could be activating for other team or other kids in the group. So the mess you ups that we talk about in the DBT groups, that can be, those content can be triggering to the teens. So we had some kind of thoughtful discussion around what their thoughts were about that. And then the role of the moderator and them reaching out, because we're trying to increase their independence to reach out when they are feeling and tuning into themselves and getting dysregulated. So that's a little bit about the group guidelines and how that came to be. And really, I think Concurrent actually did a nice example of taking that expectations document that the virtual groups kind of generated through feedback from all the areas, and they really made it their own. So I think that's the point around these expectations, is how you meet individually with the kids and then meet as a group and really make these your own and make them fit for your needs in your area. The last thing I'm going to say is, and there's no slide for this, is the Connect update. So we have been in communication with Out West in Vancouver with the developers. They are working they're working on what's called, they're calling it an eConnect group, which is using the Zoom platform. And we actually had the pleasure of joining in a mock trial last evening. So it was Peter Turnbull, Jason Finney, and Jill Williams and myself. We jumped online and did the session. We were silent observers, and it was with some Sweden folks that we had met at the conference earlier, and then also the Maples folks in Vancouver. And they did an awesome job. They did the role plays. I was surprised at how well the role plays really went. And they have some tips around how to make that evoke emotion as much as we try to do in those groups. And then the flip chart they use Google Docs for that as well, which was kind of interesting. And they've already done all that work, so that's already pre-planned and prepped. So we don't have a timeline yet on when we're going to be able to get the Connect group up and running on Zoom, but there is lots being kind of established to be able to do that very soon. So stay tuned for more updates. 4 minutes.
Thanks so much, everybody. Jen, you can probably take down the slides if we want to be able to see everyone else. I want to thank this group so much for sharing so much great information. I was hearing practical tips, things, tech for dummies, which made sense to me. So similar to what Alexa said earlier, if it can work for me, then it can work for others. I love the idea of customizing a waiting room. I didn't even know you could do that in Zoom. How cool is that? And the polls for engagement strategies at the beginning, I think are brilliant. And in terms of how we prepare, the idea of mock groups, being clear about facilitators is big, and that it's not just about preparation for us, but preparation for our clients too. So the Cope Ahead plan, I think, is brilliant to think about. It's not just us that are nervous going into this the first time, but it's our clients as well. And then hearing the real experiences from you all, right? I appreciate that it's okay to be nervous walking into this, and this is new for us, just like it is for our clients at this point. So being kind and forgiving to ourselves as we move forward on this, I think, is massive. We do have 3 minutes, so I'll give a chance if there's a question that wants to come in or anybody wants to ask, that would be great. The other thing to remind is that if you do have questions that we don't have a chance to get through today, please feel free to type them in, and then we can also send them out to presenters and circulate them back, if that would be helpful. As maybe people are typing away, I will also remind everyone who's on the line that the documents that were referred to in here, so particularly around some of the engagement strategies and looking at the Cope Ahead plan, those are things that we will make available through a link on the webinar. Also letting everyone know that the group documentation and the update to the IWK Mental Health and Addictions Virtual Visit Guide with group guidelines has been circulated as well. But again, if you can't find that for whatever reason or need an update on that, you can just email the MHA virtual practice at iwk.nshealth.ca to get questions around there. I'm not seeing questions come in yet. I'll ask just one. If one or two of you could just, as last kind of comments, any last piece of advice? We've got lots of people across the program who are sort of getting ready to run their first group and probably feeling like you were a week or two ago. Any last words of wisdom for folks as they move forward on this journey?
I'm going to suggest Colleen would be a good one to answer that.
I would just say to really be mindful that the group is the group, the skill set you bring, trusting the clients, whether they're your previous clients, whether they're your new clients. The work is transferable. For me, one of the things that needed to happen is I just needed to sort of experience that. As soon as I got in, we did a little piece around, we called it, I made it up, Maritime Kitchen Party, where we just opened Zoom up. We let everybody screech like a lot of families do and talk over. They were so polite and generous, not like I thought people would just talk over. And so what we ended up, so as soon as that was over, I was like, okay, now I remember exactly. I'm back to a place where I'm not going to think about how to remove someone or if I block the door, or I'm just, I'm there. So I do say, have faith in yourselves.
I think that's a beautiful closing comment. I think it is consistent across so many of these webinars that we've heard is trust yourselves. You are an amazing group of staff and providers who have been caring for youth and families over the course of our time, and we can bring all of that to this new virtual environment. So I want to end in that way, thanking so much the virtual group for groups, group. And remember that this is the beginning of a conversation. So we hope to continue to come back and share the experiences as we all learn together as we go forward. And again, big thank you to Jen Jeffrey, who has been the huge support behind getting all of this together and getting everything online afterwards and helping us problem solve. So thank you again, everyone, and stay tuned for our next webinar.